Good morning, everyone. I'm Holly Stapleton, your host for today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about using remote sensing technology to increase stormwater revenue without increasing rates. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to talk a little bit about the structure of our webinar today. The first part of our webinar is going to cover the different methodologies and technologies used to delineate areas of impervious surfaces and explore traditional versus remote sensing. After that, we're going to take a short break to answer any questions that you might have. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box that is on the bottom right of your screen. Then we'll progress to the second part of the webinar, which will cover return on investment, and we'll provide some real-life examples of projects that we've completed in the recent past. To end the webinar, we're going to leave a few minutes for any final questions you may have. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Brian Stevens is a program director in Wolpert's Geospatial Services Division. He's been with Wolpert for 21 years. Brian has a long history of working with local and state governments, utilizing technology to solve a variety of real-world problems. Daniel Garoy is a remote sensing expert and GIS programmer at Wolpert. He's worked at Wolpert for 10 years, and he has a master's degree in remote sensing and has over 20 years experience in the industry. I'll turn it over to Brian to begin our presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Daniel Garoy, and I'm the remote sensing scientist here at Wolpert. And I'm here to introduce you to the topic of impervious surface delineation using feature extraction or remote sensing techniques. In the past, impervious surface delineation has been quite a challenge for a lot of us remote sensing and mapping scientists or mapping technicians. The methods that we have used in the past to carry out impervious surface delineation have relied a lot on as-built or architectural drawings. They have also been based upon stereo compilation, as well as just heads up to the capture of impervious surfaces. Now, all these three methods are essentially very much technician dependent, as well as, original data set dependent in case of in the case of as-built drawing. So you're going to use what you have or what you're given, or you're going to rely upon technicians to use their skills and expertise to obtain for you the best coverage of impervious surfaces. Now, having said that, of course, there are issues with that kind of approach, where you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with technicians that may be tired or may not be as skilled or may have different levels of skill sets, to the extent that if you have multiple clients, you could have one that works well and one that doesn't work as well. So you would have disparate results across your project area. So what happened was, nearly 15 years ago, we decided to take a different approach to how we do impervious surfaces. And by that, we started to explore other ways to leverage the new types of data that was coming online. And in this case, specifically digital data. And this methodology involved feature extraction. And what is feature extraction? Feature extraction essentially is the process of taking data and looking at the vital statistics of that data and extracting the pertinent information within that data set, so that you can spare your technicians the work of having to sit and actually digitize or photo interpret the data, and have machines that are really good at, finding patterns and processing large quantities of data within a fairly short period of time. Have machines do that, and save your technicians to do something different. The process ingests, imagery and LiDAR, and this could be both new imagery, new LiDAR, or whatever existing imagery and LiDAR that you may have. It is very much, data source dependent. It could ingest existing GIS data, such as, parcel mapping that you have, if you want to limit the impervious surface delineation to just what is within the parcel boundaries. And also, the results of the process could easily be integrated in your billing system, if that is also a requirement. So the types of input data that could be used in this case could be ortho imagery that's in 4-band form, whereby we're talking about red, green, blue, and near infrared. We'll talk a little bit about why near infrared is important. It could be 8 or 16-bit, or even up to 32-bit if that's available. 6-inch or high resolution is preferred. And also we can, if you have LiDAR data, that is also a great thing, and we'll talk about why LiDAR is important in a minute. 1 meter of denser point spacing is desirable. And of course, as we mentioned before, you're going to need parcel mapping if you want to constrain your delineation within parcel areas, as well as any existing base mapping layers that you may have, such as right-of-way, edge of pavements, and buildings. So why do we need infrared? This next slide shows you what you would typically see from natural color photography, which is probably what you're familiar with. But on the right-hand side, you see a color infrared composite of the same area. And the thing that really jumps out is how vegetation kind of stands out over and above the paved surfaces, as well as the water body over to the right-hand side of that image. And this is the beauty of infrared. It's not something we see with our own naked eyes, but modern sensors can pick that up, and we can map the infrared band to the red channel in this case, as you can see, and then have the the high reflectivity of vegetation, which is high in the infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum, kind of show itself out. And then you can then develop a way to extract vegetation and remove that, so that what you're left with are impervious surfaces. Likewise, if you do include LiDAR in the process, you will have a situation where you can kind of see through things that you couldn't see through before. If you're familiar with some of the artifacts of aerial photography, you'll be aware that in built-up areas you will get issues to do with building lean that may obscure parts of your image. You could also have issues to do with tree canopy that could also obscure roads and driveways and parking lots and the likes. And LiDAR helps us kind of mitigate or reduce the effects of that kind of occlusion that may happen. So we take that data set once we have it all scrubbed and normalized. We take that data set and we bring it into our feature extraction platform. And within this platform, we can create rules, basically algorithms that tell us what to look for in order to map impervious surfaces. In the slide that you're looking at, you can see what's highlighted as yellow is the result of the initial feature extraction process where we just wrote a simple collection of rules, collection of if-then-else statements that says, if you're seeing this kind of pattern, this kind of signature, then you can consider that impervious. And real quickly, we can pull out the parking lot and the roadways fairly quickly from this imagery and, LiDAR. So basically, the imagery and LiDAR has been brought in as a complete or as a unique data stack, 5 or 6 levels deep. So how does the existing data compare to the new data sets that we create? In this one example that we're looking at, it's a mall area that was put through our processes and the impervious surface polygon extracted out of it. And that's what you can see in blue. That's the result of the feature extraction process that we applied on this. Now, how does that compare to the existing data? The existing data has relied upon the architectural drawings or the as-built for this particular area. And as you can see, they had intended to put a lot more islands in this parking lot, And really what it turns out that there weren't as many islands in this area or in this parking lot as had been intended. So if you use the existing data set, basically you would be underestimating the square footage of impervious area in this parking lot, because you would expect that there were a lot more parking islands than they are. Now with the new data set, then you get a true picture of exactly what the coverage of impervious is. And this then allows you to truly measure and to provide an accurate accounting of the impervious surface for this parking lot. So it is not only is it accurate, but it's also fair. So once we had figured out that this method had, had an upside, what we did was we decided to create a proof of concept in, one particular area here in Columbus, Ohio, whereby we took, a fairly small area. It's just maybe could equate to about 4 blocks or so. And we decided to compare the existing data versus what we extracted using the feature extraction methodology. And we were able to obtain, nearly 29,000 additional square footage of impervious over and above what was being recorded or what was being used to bill for stormwater in this particular area. The next slide kind of shows how that 29,000 square footage translates into ERUs, and also shows you what the breakdown is from a dollar perspective, what the charges would have been, and the differences in each one of those areas that were used as a proof of concept, considering that 1 ERU in this case is 2,000 square feet. And what that meant that for this fairly small area, not more than 4 blocks, you're talking about an increase of $900 over and above what the current billing cycle was. So, it showed an increase for a small area. So the methodology was then applied on all the non-residential parcels, and the mapping was completed. As you can see, we're zooming in to show you what it actually looks like from a zoomed-in perspective, and how you can see how fairly discernible the methodology is with regards to extracting impervious surfaces. It is fair, it is complete, it is accurate, and it allows us to then carry out this exact same method, 3 or 4 years down the line, and be confident that we can reproduce the same exact results. And that would not be the case if you were using technicians or any other method, because you cannot be guaranteed the same level of expertise. Um, and the truth is that since the method is accurate, you could, in some cases, see both sides of, of the coin, so to speak, right? On the left-hand side, you're seeing a case where that parcel owner was probably being overbuilt. We're seeing a decrease. So the existing impervious area is what you're looking at, that the area in blue, and the actual impervious area is the area is covered in orange. And on the left-hand side, you're seeing a decrease from the existing impervious area, but on the right-hand side, you're seeing an increase. So it allows you to be confident in your results and to also be able to defend your results if the need arises. So you may ask, could this then be applied on residential areas? It could. Usually with most jurisdictions, residential parcels are kind of billed at an ERU, a flat fee basis. But yeah, if you do want to explore a little bit more to see whether the current ERU square footage is actually the correct or close to what it should be, you can also carry out impervious surface mapping on residential parcels and get an idea of what the average ERU should then be. And the same was done in this area, and that's what you're seeing. So essentially, the impervious surface calculation or delineation was done everywhere, and then we used the parcel boundaries to kind of cookie cut that impervious area so that we can obtain the actual square footage coverage for each parcel. And that's what it looks like, from a GIS standpoint, the actual data, the polygons. The case example, again, we're going to use Columbus, Ohio as an example. You can see those are suburbs or villages within the city of Columbus. And they're ranked from like the inner city, so Franklinton being closer to the center of the city, and Worthington being, much further out. As you can see, it is true that you would see an increase in impervious surface coverage if you were to do the, you were to apply this methodology for parcel areas that, areas where parcel sizes are much larger, because you're capturing a little bit more. You're capturing the driveways, the homes, the decks, the swimming pools, and the like, things that do affect runoff. So, the inner city saw, like a 15% decrease in impervious surfaces, while the outer suburbs of the city saw a much higher increase of impervious surfaces, which kind of, is exactly what you would expect. So with that, I will open up the floor for questions on the technical parts of impervious surface coverage. If anyone has any, feel free to ask.
Please use the Q&A box that's on the right of your screen on the bottom to enter any questions.
All right.
Okay, we have one question. Brian Keel asked, what data is required to get started?
All right, good question. So orthoimagery is a crucial part of the impervious feature extraction process. So that is going to be the first thing that you would require. for the most part, it seems like that kind of data already exists for parts of the Atlanta metro area. So you got 2016 imagery that is already full band imagery, and that will be a good place to start. As I mentioned before during one of the slides, LiDAR is also a crucial part of the process. So in addition to the ortho imagery, we would also need LiDAR, 1 meter or better. And then, whatever existing planimetric or GIS layers that could be of use, such as the Parcel fabric, that would also be great to have. So aerial photography, that's what I call the ortho imagery, and LiDAR. That would be a good, good place to start off.
Brian, we unmuted your mic if you'd like to have any follow-up questions for Daniel.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. And it's not just Brian Keel. There's about 8 of us in a room here watching. So I saw we missed like the first 5 minutes or so, but one of the slides early on when we came in, you guys were showing some infrared something or other. So that's not necessary for the tool to work?
Well, usually with aerial photography, over the last 10 years, infrared is kind of standard part of the deliverable. So what I mean by that is that, the aerial photography that you have probably already has an infrared component to it as part of the deliverables. But if that's not the case, then obviously we can look at other options. It is important that we have infrared just to be able to differentiate between, what is paved and what's not, because within the infrared band, we get to see vegetation a little bit more clearly than you would in just your natural color photography.
Okay, thanks.
Next question is, how does remote sensing evaluate gravel?
Yeah, again, good question. So gravel is actually obtainable using the full data stack that we talked about. So assuming, in the perfect scenario, you have 6-inch or better aerial photography, you have 1 meter or better point density for your LiDAR, you can, and we have done this, we have proved it, that we can differentiate between gravel, paved surfaces, and compacted earth. And we did this for, if I was to give you an example, city of Indianapolis, Indiana, where one of the requirements was that we differentiate or segregate between compacted earth and gravel. And that was actually fairly successfully done without, any, a lot of, additional work.
Last question is, do you use a proprietary software or just LiDAR?
So LiDAR is one of the data sources that we used. We do have some tools that we have built, obviously, in-house to make our process work well, because typically when we are running these kinds of processes, we're running it for large. I mean, we've done it for small, jurisdictions, 50 square miles or less. But we've also accomplished this over, larger jurisdictions, 600 square miles, 700 square miles, whereby we need to be able to take our tools and then scale them so that they can perform fast and well over large areas without failing. Because, we talk about 600 square miles and you're trying to ingest full-band imagery as well as the LiDAR, that's a lot of data. So you're going to need to be able to distribute the processes across multiple machines or have a server built up. So we have built our own tools in-house that allow us to do that. So yeah, there is, additional software development that we have performed to make this possible.
Thank you, Daniel. Does anyone have any other questions? We'll give about another minute, and then we'll resume the webinar. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll proceed with part 2.
All right, guys, this is Brian Stevens. Thank you, Daniel, for a very thorough technical review. As some of you out there may know, I mean, we could really get down into the weeds. Daniel's done several processes over the last few years, especially, very detailed. But one of the things I wanted to touch upon is ROI analysis, which I know everyone's out there interested in hearing how, our historical information, what we've seen in the past, and how it's come out. So what we've done, we prepared, like I taught, we prepared 3 project areas for you guys, more or less. This isn't totally comprehensive. This just happens to be areas that we selected in the Midwest, just where we're very strong in the Dayton, Ohio area, but we perform projects all throughout the U.S. One that down in the southern part of the U.S., down in Dorchester County, South Carolina, is one that comes to mind that we've done here recently too. So these are just 3 examples, and 2 fairly large cities, one relatively, I guess, small in size, but just to show you, give you a little bit of idea of scalability too, as Daniel had mentioned earlier. So what we have here, I'm going to touch base upon the City of Columbus first. We've gotten a lot of information from them, but they didn't provide everything in the table as you see here, but we will see others as we go along here. And basically, you've got a city the size of Columbus, about 800,000 population, service area of approximately 700 square miles. And we picked up non-residential parcels only. What they saw using the process, and this has been a few years ago now at this point, but they saw an increase of around 150,000 ERUs, which equated to around $425,000 additional per month for their stormwater utility. In square feet, you see there is over 300 million square feet, so a lot of area. One thing that, sorry about that. The one thing that you do notice is that the city of Columbus had been using as-built drawings as their basis for their impervious surface delineation. And over the years, I mean, the cities and cities everywhere have grown, quite a bit. And so for them, it was a challenge keeping everything up to date because, what's on an as-built drawing is not necessarily what is as constructed out in the field. So they had a feeling that some of their information was not up to date, but they had a staff of around 4 individuals that basically maintained this all year round. And just the complexity and the number of parcels to manage, was just a very large endeavor on their end. So they saw a need and a want to try to improve their process and to try to take advantage more of the technology and the processes that exist today. So that's what was undertaken. City of Indianapolis, again, population very similar to Columbus. Service area is a little bit smaller than Columbus, about 400 square miles, and again, non-residential parcels. They saw a difference of about 54,000 base billing units. Each, jurisdiction, as Daniel has mentioned, a lot of them have different nomenclature for the different, we call ERUs, but some people have different breakdowns of what they call those things. But they saw basically an increase of around 54,000 base billing units of an increase there, which equated to around $60,000 a month increase in their stormwater utility, which was about a 4% change. The square footage you see there about 71 million. And what we see too, and just to maybe elaborate a little bit on what I'm thinking about it here, is that one thing that you see is the difference, the change differences percentage-wise. Each jurisdiction handles things a little bit differently, as far as their the importance they put on it and the resources they have available to do that, how often they update it, how well they maintain it, those types of things. So some communities, or like Indy, for example, here, they maintain their stormwater utility pretty accurately over the years. But since then they saw a 4% increase as far as anything larger than that, just because they were on top of it, maintaining it pretty much on a yearly basis. And then we have City of Springfield, Ohio, which is an example of a much smaller community. And so as Daniel mentioned, the process is very scalable based on the information that's at hand. So for these guys, 30 square mile service area versus anything in the hundreds plus square miles. They saw a difference in again, here's another term, ESU versus ERU, about 7,000, which equated to them about $11,500 a month increase, almost 21 million square feet. You see that theirs was 11% increase versus what you saw earlier in some of the other communities, which, you know, typically what we've seen. Some of the smaller communities that don't have the staffing and rely upon, you know, updating and maintaining on a much less frequent period, they see much more increases when they do their updates, and I think we all can understand how that happens. To get a little bit more into Indianapolis, just to give you some number breakdowns here on the amount that they invested versus what they saw as an annual return. They initially spent around $235,000 to have LiDAR and imagery and to have the extraction process performed, which then equated to around $722,000 increase in their annual return. And that's obviously just the first year, right, when they would contract with us to do that work. Years after this, right, years two and beyond, they're going to see that $722,000 every year from then on out. So obviously pretty good, you know, small percentage as you saw earlier, but a pretty good increase in what they're receiving on a yearly basis, which more than justified the cost of them going out and having it done in the first place. Some client benefits, some side benefits here that you see of the process itself, and Daniel touched upon a lot of these as well, but I'll touch upon them some a little bit more here. You know, it's a fair assessment. Nothing wrong with the technicians that we all have. I mean, Wilpert's got technicians, everyone, you know, people that have stormwater utilities, most people have technicians, you know, nothing wrong with those people. Most of them do a very good job, but, you know, each individual will interpret something a little bit differently. You know, a person will have a good day, a bad day, those types of things. And, you know, the worst kind of issues or errors is when you have inconsistent errors. And that's one thing that this process pretty much eliminates, because, you know, you're looking at ones and zeros versus, you know, human beings and having good days and bad days, those types of things. So you get a very fair and equitable process. It very much streamlines the process. I mean, something that would have, like example, City of Columbus, since we've been on that theme, you know, something that would have taken probably over a year to complete with a team of technicians, took us about 4 months time overall to then perform that extraction, clean that data up, and then get it back out to the client. So very streamlined, and then cost effective. Goes hand in hand with that. And what we see as a percentage is we're seeing anywhere from about 70 to 75% automated and about 30 to 25% on the backside on the manual review. So it's not 100% yet, and I don't know if we really touched upon the semi-automated process that much, but the semi-automated process is just that. It's not fully automated. The software is good, but it's not perfect. And as Daniel mentioned, the better data that you have, the better the results, because that's what it's looking at, right? So it's very dependent upon the quality of the data that you have, whether that be orthoimagery or LiDAR or any of those other types of data that Daniel outlined earlier on. We definitely see a decrease in human error, and that plays back into the steps above. Again, not a good day, bad day. It just runs. It looks at, you know, looks at the ones and zeros, so to speak. And Daniel and his process, Daniel has to design rule sets around the data. And as long as those rule sets are good, like I say, that's when we get very consistent data. But then that plays back into what we're getting into next, reproducible and repeatable. So having those rule sets available, knowing that those data sets work well with the ones and zeros, you know, it processes it very accurately and very repeatable in the future. So, you know, whether you have a community that's 800,000 or a million population, one that has 50,000, it's going to be very repeatable over the course of whatever your maintenance cycle would be. Again, touching upon it again, scalable to fit within your area of interest. Reduced technician hours, sorry. What we've seen in a lot of these communities too is that larger communities that had a team of folks working on a process such as this can actually release technicians to do other tasks that they always wanted these technicians to do, but were otherwise locked in doing updating on the impervious surface areas. So that's one thing that we've seen quite often from the clients, that they have the ability to then assign people to other tasks, which obviously they're very happy to do that. And one other last bullet here, strong results from analysis of multiple data sources. You know, when you were doing things manually, you relied upon that human being to look at it, like look at an ortho photo, for example, and trying to interpret, you know, where that line should be placed, for example. Well, you know, taking additional data sets, whether they be LiDAR, you know, other GIS data sources, other ortho imagery data sets, you know, having all those additional data sets and combining them together is strengthening the solution, so to speak. The more data you have, the better, you know, your results can be. The more confident you can be in what you're actually achieving and outputting. I'm going to go through an existing client list. This isn't entirely comprehensive, but to give you guys an idea of some of the different communities. I don't know how familiar you are with some of the places up north here, but they range in size, like I said, from the Springfields, you know, your 50,000 population, all the way up to your million population, the city of Columbuses and Indianapolises. One project that's of interest, too, is the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. One thing that was done there that was done a little differently, it wasn't done for a stormwater utility. It can be used for that, and they are actually going out and working with the communities to enhance and to get buy-in to do that, because a lot of these communities in Pennsylvania at this time don't have a stormwater utility. But the main purpose why the client undertook this project for them was for environmental purposes. They have a lot of sport fishing that goes on up there, and they have a lot of freshwater streams and whatnot, and a lot of trout fishing, and the water has to be pretty pristine. So they started taking this data and using it to not just extract out residential or non-res, but basically all impervious surfaces, so they could do a complete model of how much impervious surface they have within the watershed itself, which the watershed is roughly 500 square miles in size. So a pretty large data set there. But you can see that we've had a sampling from, you see a lot of Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, but then we've also reached out into Minnesota as well as down into South Carolina. And we're getting more and more, you know, as the day goes on. We're actually looking at a few additional this year that are starting up. So the process is definitely moving forward and garnering strength. Some contracting vehicles for those. I put this in there just because, you know, they asked the question, well, how do these communities, you know, how do they buy into these programs? You know, how do they contract these things? Well, it's a wide range of different types of solutions. And one that I'm sure everybody's familiar with, and I put down toward the bottom on the right-hand side, is the RFP, RFQ process. And that's what Indianapolis undertook, for example. But other communities have undertaken other processes, whether it's state term contracts or if it's you know, GSA schedules. Some states have statewide imagery programs, which some of these communities are buying into that program. But you see there for Indiana, Maine, and Ohio as examples, and then the communities would buy up underneath that contracting mechanism. And of course, if you have existing stormwater utility contracts, that's obviously one that's very, you know, out there. But it's a wide range of different types of solutions and different types of things that are available to you. One thing that we're looking at too, just to touch upon it, is a 3P, basically a public-private partnership type of a undertaking, where we're looking at possibly, you know, communities that don't have big, huge pots of money can afford maybe to have this done on a regular basis. We're looking at possibly working with those communities and investing, you know, our effort to go out and to have the imagery LiDAR and the impervious delineated, acquired and delineated, and then look upon, you know, sharing the revenues that would come in for a community. So that's something that's available too at this time. With that, I think that's all we have. Back to you, Holly.
Thank you, Brian. We'll take a few minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A box on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer all of them.
And while we're paused here, I'll just extend a thank you to everyone out there in the audience. I know that, you know, taking time out of your day is a tough thing for a lot of us, and I just want to, you know, send out a thanks to everyone for making time for us. And if down the road too, Daniel and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that, and I know it's hard, right now to sometimes come up with answers or questions that you may have, but we'd be happy to share our PowerPoint. I think we're going to make some data available on the backside here for everyone to download and be able to take a look at independently. And at that time, if you guys want to reach back out to us in the future, we'd be happy to answer anything that you may have.
I think we do have some questions. Hold on one second, Brian. How often are localities that have adopted, how often are they updating?
Well, we're seeing, it's a wide range, of course. Everyone's a little different. But the communities that we see, they're looking at about a 4-year cycle is what we're typically seeing, where they're flying new imagery LiDAR and then performing the update, so to speak, in a 4-year cycle. I think that would be dependent upon your growth that you're undertaking. Some places obviously will be growing much faster than others, and maybe it's more important to have the cycle shortened because of that. Some may want to undertake a longer cycle just because maybe they're not growing as fast, and maybe they have staff, that can handle the load, so to speak, more so than others as well, and that plays into that well as too. But we are seeing about a 4-year cycle on average.
If there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude. Just as a reminder to everyone, we have recorded this, so we'll be posting it on our website so you can watch it again or you can share it with your colleagues. Thank you guys all very much for attending. We appreciate your time. We'll definitely have a source for you to ask any other questions as well after the webinar is over. Thanks, everyone.